welcome to the Rush Roundtable. This is episode 251. We are moving past 250 into episode 251, which is the first song off of 19, no, not 19. What year is this? 2007's Snakes and Arrows album, Far Cry. First single, first song, first video, first track. And of course, with me is Paul and David, as per usual. And we have Kira, Tyler, and Derek. Don't forget, we do have Ko-fi that you can check out if you wanted to throw a tip. There's certainly subscribing to this channel. That's always a big one. Subscribe, share, comment. And hey, we have sponsors, right? So we're looking at those below. That's always a good thing. Sponsors would definitely want to hear from you. So if we begin talking about Far Cry, that intro, kicking right in with some of those nice punchy chords, basically. Lifeson had some 16ths running. Studio, live, a little different, but the same effect. Ending with the Lifeson chord, which, as we all know, is an F sharp 7. Oh, no, he said it wrong. F sharp 11. It's an F sharp 11. Why did I get it wrong? It's not an F sharp 7 add 4, it's an F sharp 11. It wouldn't have an add 4 because it has a 7. That's your music theory for the day. So I'm going to shut up and I'm going to turn it over to anyone who wants to hear from that, or anyone who wants to say something about that, I should say, because clearly I'm going to need to see who else has something to say. Who else has something to say about that intro?
I'm going to be a little nostalgic here.
Hmm.
I remember back in 2007, the first Rush album since, Vapor Trails, Not Kind of Feedback and whatnot. And on the website, they played a little teaser. And it was just that intro. Of course, it starts out strong, right? And then all of a sudden, the Lifeson chord. And every Rush fan everywhere heard Hemispheres.
Yeah.
And so we were wondering, oh my gosh, what is this album going to be? What's it going to sound like? Is it another prog album? Is it a, concept album? What's it going to be? But just hearing that chord was so hopeful. And of course, in true Rush fashion, that album was its own album with its own sound, with its own themes, and it was marvelous. But that chord just got us all really, really excited. At least it did me.
Yeah. Especially following up with a distinct riff, because the riff that follows the chord, very F sharp minor, he throws in a flat 5. Okay, more theory. Sorry, I had to go there. But it's the sort of thing where it was such a distinctive riff to follow the chord after just, Geddy and Neil are slamming in with some of those nice punches, and you got the 16ths.
And I
And you
think
want
it's
to
worth
slam
mentioning. No, I think it's worth mentioning off of those that new producer for them, Nick Raskulinecz, also known as Booge, which we can get into probably in a future roundtable as far as the nickname, but him being a longtime Rush fan and an unabashed Rush fan, demanded that they use they go back to their roots and they use some older equipment and get some of
Ampeg
that.
amps,
Thank you.
old school.
Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. So the presence of this chord in the start of the first song, the lead off single, makes a lot of sense on a lot of levels. So
Mhm.
Nice. Well, you should probably get into the verse because, needless to say, if you're talking about a Rush song, you are talking about Neil Peart writing because it was not to be topped in the rock pantheon. So that first verse, pariah dogs and wandering madmen, barking at strangers and speaking in tongues, the ebb and flow of tidal fortune, electrical charges are charging up the young.
changes.
Again, lyrically, he's coming in punching.
Well,
I
go.
find the last line of this verse particularly intriguing because all of you guys are older than me, so you'll remember this better than me. But I'm a millennial, was born in 95, so I'm 29. And back in 2007, when this album came out, the only social media we had was MySpace. From what I remember, Facebook didn't exist, Twitter or X, whatever you call it, didn't exist, or Snapchat or TikTok. And the first smartphone came out, and I remember people were kind of like, what is this dinky thing? Like, it wasn't really too groundbreaking. There wasn't really a lot of excitement. So I just like, I wonder, maybe, if Neil sort of envisioned the future we live in now. I mean, he seems to be really good in his lyrics, talking about things even though they happened so like long ago or somehow still relevant, which is amazing. So I wonder if it's sort of like a warning
Well,
of
even as far
where
back
we
as
are headed.
virtuality.
Yeah, as a slave to technology, right? And how we're slaves to, these darn smartphones, and they sort of control us, and we've lost the art and beauty of communication, which is kind of a deviation from this song because really this song is about how he sees the world skeptically, for the good and the bad.
I think it
So,
ties in together, to be honest.
yeah, it does.
Yeah, virtuality. We had IRC, we had AOL chat rooms and Yahoo chat rooms and all that and all those connections and even electronic dating and all that before. But MySpace being the first big social media platform. Yeah, I think that's exactly what he's talking about there. And actually, to tie it in with, we'll get to the artwork later, but the whole idea that, I mean, they called this song uh, the title track and everything except in name, which will come up,
Mhm.
we'll cover next week in Armor and Sword. But going over the lyrics, what hit me immediately was that unsurety, uh, as far as like the uneasiness, the pariah dogs and wandering madmen barking at strangers and speaking in tongues. Now, pariah dogs, the word pariah off the bat, first word on the album. Now we know that as an outcast, but if you trace the origin of the word itself, it goes back to Hindi times, thousands of years ago in the caste system. A pariah, that's actually considered very, very inflammatory, saying that someone is very, very low caste. Very, very, that's a very, very rude thing to say. So you've got pariah dogs and wandering madmen barking at strangers and speaking in tongues. So one of the themes in this album that we're going to see over and over again in these songs is one of the things that inspired Neil's lyrics, he wrote about plenty, was as he was driving across America and seeing religious billboards and all that, sort of really pushing. I'm trying to avoiding using the word force, but really pushing a specific belief set, and that got Neil thinking about how it is taught and imprinted on children at such a young age
Mhm.
that there aren't many people who are choosing their own path as they get
Right.
old. So it's imprinted on the young. So the whole idea that here's where things going to start spiraling. So David, get ready, and everybody else. Um, the ebb and flow of tidal fortune and electrical changes charging up the young. Considering what we'll get into when we talk about snakes and arrows as a whole, the idea of birth being the beginning of the path, that very much ties in. And charging up the young, they now have an unsure, being born into an unsure world is where I'm trying to take this, and then I'll stop until future verses and choruses. But I think they all tie in together here.
Nice. Does anyone else have anything to add? Because I know I could actually say stuff, but again, I don't want to dominate. I'm the
I think
host, but anyway.
I think one thing I really just I had to do a quick little research job here, but it did say that these lyrics came like they fit immediately. There wasn't a lot of revision. It was like it just came instantly. So then it's like it's one of those deals. It's like 'cause I write lyrics too, not quite as heady as Neil's, but you sometimes throw some ideas down, and then when you look at it later, you kind of just it's like, wow, this is actually making quite a statement. We might not sure exactly what it all means because in that first verse, there's a whole lot of ideas just in one verse. And I think that barking at strangers and speaking in tongues, that boy, that's loaded. That is loaded. And yeah, that's 2007. That's today.
Yeah.
Yeah,
For certain sectors of the
you just
population.
touched on something that I was thinking about. This album in just a couple of years will already be 20 years old,
Come
Yeah.
on.
right? So most of my students are
We're
20 years
alive.
old
Yeah.
or less, you know, and this speaks to their experience, right? And what Paul was saying in terms of, um, you come into this world, you didn't get to pick your name, you didn't, whatever. And now they're wanting to kind of figure themselves out, remake themselves because they're not happy or content with the world they were thrown into. Yeah. So yeah, I mean it's classic Neil. He writes something that he's just experiencing at the time, and 20 years later, it speaks to the experience of all of us in different ways today, depending on where we're at. So
Well, when I hear this song at the very end, where he says speaking in tongues, my brain wants to insert a hey, like a backing vocal straight out of a mid 2010s Green Day song. It's kind of revolutionary in that way.
And that's
Pretty
actually
Green Day.
something, yeah, think of that he's got these lyrics that he chose, but they also had to work musically. The fact that, as Getty has said, that he would have to work with Neil on, does this sing? And does this sing in a way that is obviously comfortable to Getty? And there's just, you stop and think about just so many of the, Pariah Dogs connected. Wandering Madman. Well, Pariah Dogs, that's pretty punchy. Wandering Madmen, softer consonants.
The alliteration.
Things to notice. Yeah, exactly. That too. Yeah. And then, yeah, this is an album, and I'm not going to go too far into this explanation or this thread of mine here, but I'll say more probably a song or two in. But I just think about, to me, this seems like an album where Neil's lyrics speak very well to how he grew up, or I should say where he was. They were around 53, 54 when this was recorded, and the idea of, okay, you look at a song like Free Will when they were still in their 20s, and I'm choosing Free Will because of the fact that it can be sometimes questioned now by even physicists. Do we have free will? Or, as with some of what's being asserted here, are we really just products of what was placed upon us as we were born and grew up with the people we grew up with in the culture we grew up with? Are our responses pre-programmed?
yeah, this is where I love the line: electrical changes are charging up the young. Right? They are responding.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, there is determinism.
Yes.
But there is a choice in, I mean, you didn't ask to be in this world, or where your family, your language, your culture, anything. You didn't ask for any of that. You were just thrown into it. But you can reflect on it, think on it, and choose how you want to be in that world. So it's the whole free will determinism debate. Is it free will or is it determinism? My answer, yes.
I was going to say, that's why I always went with compatibilism, because I'm in the middle.
Yeah. Yeah. And the
determinism
idea
dictates free will.
Yeah. And like, obviously, this being the first album that wasn't directly working out Neil's loss of family, that album was him exercising the demons, coming to terms, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, too, he obviously made the choice to live, to survive, to move forward. So this is an album after that, but how could he not address that in a different fashion?
I made a note on that later, by the way, the tie into Vapor Trail, so I'm glad you said that now.
Now I feel bad because I already kind of engaged in inadvertent foreshadowing. But since we're hanging out on this first verse for an hour and a half, well, it's not an hour and a half. It's like, let's move to the pre-chorus, because now Neil doesn't have awesome things for us to look at. So, pre-chorus, it's a far cry from the world we thought we'd inherit. It's a far cry from the way we thought we'd share it. You can almost feel the current flowing. You can almost see the circuits blowing.
Back to you, Kira, with those last two lines, by the way. I have a note on there saying Kira's comments. It ties in nice with what you were saying. Seriously.
Thank
Current
you.
flowing, circuits blowing, it's getting bigger. So, and while we're on circuits blowing, by the way, before I forget, massive shout out to Howard Ungerleider as far as the lighting on the live versions of this. Circuits blowing, it's granted, it's the second time they sing that where the explosion goes off and everybody at that concert loses their mind. But what an amazing
Every
job
time.
on the live versions. Just wanted to throw that out there.
You know, the pre-chorus is repeated a lot, especially the first two lines. It's a far cry from the world we thought we'd inherit. And then it's almost the same line. It's a far cry from the way we thought we'd share it. Maybe you guys interpret this differently than I do, which is fine. Maybe it's because of what I was reading last semester. But I was thinking about how, and some of you guys that are older that have been through more than me will probably have something to say about this, where every generation feels as though they've been dealt a bad hand by its predecessors. And again, I'm just thinking of it this way because of what, like, the most recent things I read when I was in school, particularly looking at like the mental health of Gen Z, which is the generation that starts like 10 months after I was born. And, millennials were sort of feeling it a little bit too, with like just the way the world is and the high cost of living and how expensive everything is, and that there's so much struggle. So, these are skeptical lyrics. Even though this isn't supposed to be a really heavy verse, just the way I think of it, it feels heavy. Like it feels sad. But, you guys tell me
I
what it is you feel
agree.
it is.
I think that's actually very, very,
Right on
very,
target.
very hard to dispute, in my opinion. And think back to our 20s, gentlemen. We felt that way too.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, it's just
And
bad
think about them
jobs.
in their 20s.
Well,
first
yeah,
line
that's
songwriter as young person, second line songwriter as older person.
yeah.
We thought
Yeah.
we'd inherit a better world. I think that very much lends to your point, Kira. We thought we'd inherit a world that was better than this. Second line, far cry from what we thought we were going to share. We thought we were going to do it right this time. Every generation thinks that, I believe, at least the ones I've seen so far.
Feels
And
like it's getting worse, not
Right.
better.
It's a very it's a kind of a when they were coming up, it was the hippie era.
right.
And another Canadian band, the Guess Who, said, "Baby, I'll be there to take your hand. Baby, I'll be there to share the land." That's just one of a countless dozens of songs of that era that talk about sharing and making a better world. And then by the time you roll into the 70s, that's kind of gone away. Now we're in this hangover period. And then by the time you get to the 2000s, you're like, boy, we're way off from where we thought we were going.
Yeah.
And so that's the vibe there. All those hippie ideals that we kind of had, those are not
Closer to the heart. This is the same lyricist who wrote Closer to the Heart.
Yep.
Yeah.
Take that in. I agree.
Yep.
Yeah.
And speaking of older songs too, going back to 2112, the meek shall inherit the earth. Well, what happened to that? Now it feels like it's the opposite.
Yeah.
Nice.
Oh, good point. Good point. Yeah, I mean, this idea that it's a world we should share, which means everybody has a stake and we're not just looking out for ourselves, but for each other, but I just don't want to get political.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Neil
80s,
evolved. I'll
Yeah.
help. Neil evolved.
Let me go 50 years ago, so that'll make it okay, right? Reagan busted the air traffic controllers, and that started union busting. You can think whatever you want about unions, the good, bad, the ugly, right? But it went from kind of solidarity and everybody being lifted up to you're on your own.
Yeah.
Law of the jungle. And we've become such an individualistic society.
Yeah.
Right. Rather than a society where let's try to lift everybody up. And a lot of resentment, amongst people that work really hard and don't have anything. Right. And they want to blame people that have
Less
zero
than anything.
responsibility for their situation.
Mhm.
Right. So, yeah, it's a far cry from the world we thought we'd inherit. It's a far cry from the world we thought, we'd share. But, um, but, and this is what I love about the song. Yeah, my very simplistic summation of the song is life sucks. It's never what you expected, but I can get back on.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, this is one where, and I'm glad that the rest of us were kind of thinking it too, even before we began recording, that, I kept thinking that, okay, perhaps a disclaimer to the audience that obviously we're not a political discussion. We're not going to want to engage in political discussion. And for weeks leading up to this, I kept thinking, perhaps maybe we just look at it as Neil's view on society and humanity, and not even in the brain allow it to drift into the statement of politics, but just the human condition, because that's really where Neil didn't like politics. We know that. So, and that's where this and a couple other songs that I can't wait to speak about, but I'm not wanting to waste away the weeks. You could see the young libertarian became the older man who still has the libertarian foundation of, I don't personally want people telling me what to do. However, I recognize that with the billions of people on this planet, and I'm not going to get into the lyrics from songs that'll be forthcoming, but already he's got that on a few of these songs, like right up front in the first 4 songs easily. So it's kind of difficult to avoid.
5, because Spindrift I think is 5th, and that's one of the main points of it. So yeah, and I'll hold that for that episode because I'm hosting that. But to both of those points, remember this was he said it. That's what I was trying to go with. Neil said in interviews, this is not conjecture, we're not guessing on this. He said in interviews as far back as Roll the Bones into Counterparts that I used to view things this way. I now view things this way. Look at Alien Shore. Look at Totem. Look at, his views evolved, and it's clear in his writing and in his books, if you've read his books as well. It is not just about the individual back, 2112, Ayn Rand days. It's now about we have to improve and we have to think of each other, not at the cost of the individual, but in order to help all the other individuals as a whole.
Go back to Hemispheres, 1978. I mean, I think the Ayn Rand hand is overplayed with Rush.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Right?
Agreed.
Because they were young kids and we all want to do it our way, Frank Sinatra, and that appealed to them, but close to the heart. The Sphere, A Kind of Dream, the last part of Hemispheres. There was always a sense of social responsibility in Rush that got much more developed and matured as they grew older and matured, But this idea that Rush went from hyper individualist to, whatever, I think is
responsible individualists.
Yeah, responsible individuals. One of my favorite philosophers, Paul Ricoeur, capable human being is responsible human being. We can act, we have agency, but that also makes us responsible. And I think Neil always understood that. And in his Rolling Stone interview made the comment that, what he thought libertarianism wasn't what most libertarians thought they were, But it's all about being free, being creative, being to pursue your own path in life. Nobody, except fascists, think you shouldn't be allowed to do that.
Right.
Right. So we can be individuals, but we can also be individuals together and lift each other up. And it's a perfect antidote to so much of the conflict we have, I think, in our world today. And I should really stop talking.
All right. So before I move us into the chorus, because I'm going to do that, I'm going to wrap this back to what we're saying here. If we go back to the first verse, the ebb and flow of tidal fortune, as if to say that a rising tide lifts all boats. So already that just feels like Neil might be throwing in a little, obviously it's multi-meaning, but a little bit of, he's dealing with elements. It's something he was doing a bit on Test Fracco, but in this case,
he loves writing about the weather.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he was riding in the weather for thousands of miles or kilometers. Sorry, but the idea there is, a little bit of positivity. I mean, that's the big thing about them as a band. There's that positivity, and that's and it was just now that I had thought that. So anyway, let's move to the chorus
Good time.
because we're a little ways in, says my counter, so we might as well hit that chorus. So one day I feel I'm on top of the world, and the next it's falling in on me. I can get back on. I can get back on. One day I feel I'm ahead of the wheel. The next it's rolling over me. I can get back on. I can get back on.
Hmm. Life is like a bunch of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get.
As a counselor, as a substance use counselor, that's a theme you run into a lot with people. Is like there's gonna be good days, there's gonna be bad days, and you can always start your day over anytime you want. Even if there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on in the world, you can always just kind of step back, reset, and then get back on, get back on that wheel, as it were, because life is a wheel. I mean, that's what I try to teach clients, is that life is a wheel, and it's okay to step out every once in a while and step out of that wheel and get recentered and get back on. So it's a pretty big theme, a really big, and I think it's a key point because we live in a pretty chaotic world, and it's very easy to get overwhelmed and discouraged, and so I think this is just about self-care.
And
really.
Tie it back to, I said earlier to put a pin in vapor trails, and this is where I bring it back up, which is Neil just did this.
Yeah.
Everything went down. He felt he lost everything. We've talked about it for how many months now with our Vapor Trails roundtables. We've talked about the book Ghost Rider. We've got the facts. We know what happened. And and I can get back on. I love that this was the lead single.
Yes.
Because it's as much as we've talked about the downside of the skepticism and all that, bring it right back to, like you said, and then get back on. How did we end Out of the Cradle? We ended it the same way.
Yeah.
Got back on. Now I'm endlessly rocking. I'm still going. And tied into the theme of Snakes and Arrows, as far as looking at the whole idea of, again, Dharma, rebirth into that consciousness and all that. You start over again.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's in small time increments, one day at a time, what have you, to larger increments, one life at a time. So,
or begin again.
No matter what, there's always going to be good days and bad days, in life. And sometimes one day is good, and then it's like it all just goes to shit. And I say it all the time to people. Sometimes, you just gotta ride the wave of life. Sometimes you crash, and sometimes you win a really big battle. And it's just, I love Neil's explanation of the mundane, while simplistic, is yet so sophisticated, and its beauty.
The way the big wheel spins.
It's like a good, gentle nudge reminder. I know I'm being skeptical right now, but this is just how life is, and it's not that bad.
Yeah. And it's kind of non-judgmental, right?
Yeah.
So, it's a bad day, and I'm skeptical, and somebody can point a finger and say, you shouldn't be that way because whatever, no, it's okay to be skeptical, but the next day you might not be so much, sometimes things work out, sometimes they don't, it's a far cry from how we hope things would be, but nonetheless, you just get back on the wheel.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And not to get too far into the title of the song, but it's kind of like if someone's crying. You get a lot of these people, oh, don't cry. It's like, if they want to cry, they can cry. Let them cry. Who cares? If that's what they need, that's what oh, don't cry. It's like, no, stop it. Let them cry. If that helps them, go for it.
Get it out. Yeah.
Not to be too literal. But I had to. Anyway, shall we move into the next verse?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's do that. So, second verse, different from the first. Whirlwind life of faith and betrayal, rise in anger, fall back and repeat. Slow degrees on the dark horizon, full moon rising, lays silver at your feet.
We had
Mm.
that cycle again.
Man.
Whirlwind, so we've already talked of the chaos. Uh, Faith and betrayal, so ups, downs, what we can rely on, what we didn't rely on. Rise in anger, fall back, repeat. My actual favorite line in the song is "Full moon rising lays silver at your feet" because I dug deep
Wow.
into that between the idea. I mean, again, taking the looking at the Indian roots of the whole idea of snakes and arrows for a minute. Silver is of the moon for starters, and you can be as basic as looking at moonlight on the water, and it looks silver. But that being said, it is considered rejuvenating as far as an element goes. So if you have slow degrees on a dark horizon, that's some pretty bleak shit there. But then full moon rising, and here's the start of the process all over again, lays silver at your feet. Here's your gift. Like, that is brilliant writing.
Yeah. Even if it wasn't intended to, I mean, and that's the thing. When he writes, it has an intended meaning. But I mean, you could just look at it on its face, and it's very just evocative without having to have a meaning to it. It's very vivid, right? It gives you a mental picture. But the one thing, yeah, that's a cool observation about this laying silver at your feet. But I was thinking about like whirlwind life of faith and betrayal. It's like that's kind of like how, especially when we get older, we start kind of trying to figure out what it is that how we fit into stuff. What is our relationship to what our higher power or God or religion or trying to reconcile some of this stuff because we see a lot of we hear a lot about people talking about how they live and how they live according to the gospel, but then they do the exact opposite. They go to church on Sunday and then the rest of the week they swear and drink and do whatever else they do. So it's like, and you go through life observing that in your own household, but when you're way you're raised, and then just like in your observations in other people's lives, it's like there's this conflict between what you feel faith is, and how you wished everybody lived a little bit like that, but nobody really does. Right? I don't know. The whole verse is just packed with visual stuff. It's really nice.
Neil said in interviews that what you just said is what inspired the writing of the lyrics for this album. You just summed up the whole album right there. That's his lover's quarrel with the world. Huh? Yeah. Funny how that works. He did bring up Robert Frost's poem, The Lesson for Today, which Robert Frost passed in 1963. And later that year, they did a documentary that they also called Lover's Quarrel with the World, based on the last line of that poem. Very long poem, amazing poem, read it. But just to grab a couple quick lines, the writer's in a cemetery, he's looking at each stone. Robert Frost was known for being an everyman type of poet. And as he's looking at these stones and thinking of all these lives lived and this cycle that they're going through, the last couple lines, the earth itself is liable to the fate of meaninglessly being broken off, and hence so many literary tears at which my inclination is to scoff. I may have wept that any should have died or missed their chance or not have been their best, or been their riches, fame, or love denied on me as much as any is the jest. I taken my incompleteness with the rest. God bless himself, can no one else be blessed? I hold your doctrine of memento mori, and were an epitaph to be my story, I'd have a short one ready for my own. I would have written of me on my stone, I had a lover's quarrel with the world. And Neil said in his interviews on this album that was the whole basis for he said he called it a very loose theme, but that lover's quarrel with the world, it's everything that we've talked about up to now, and including specifically what Tyler just said. So
Yeah.
want to make sure that got
I would love to have sat down with Neil and had this conversation. In my field, represented by all that stuff back there, the theme of what is called the first naivete and the second naivete. Right. The first naivete is we're born into the world and we think it's going to be wonderful. It's great. We're cared for, we're loved, we're fed. We have joy. And then all of a sudden, there's the experience of loss, the experience of pain. It's a far cry from the world we thought we were going to inherit and share and whatnot, And so the temptation is always to despair. But the second naivete is I can still have joy with full acknowledgement that it's not, life is not everything I thought it would be. It's not all, what, unicorn farts and,
Rainbows.
lollipops and rainbows and all of those things. But I don't have to give up my joy, even with the acknowledgement. So, if you want to deny, this is what I hate about so much self-help stuff and everything. It's just, positive vibes only, and everything is wonderful and it's great, only accept the good. No, life is full of disappointment and pain and things we didn't expect or want, and we can't do anything about them. But it's not the last word.
Life on life's terms.
It is never the last word.
That's where I've often had issue with the phrase "pursuit of happiness," because it's like happiness is not a good pursuit. It's it's the idea of like David is saying, just the notion of an acknowledgement that good, bad, middle, it's all going to be there, and the idea that why is rain bad weather? Why is snow bad weather? Because some people decided to say it and then decided to share it.
Well, it's framed by the economy. You can't go to your job if it's snowing. It's like that, right? But the idea of happiness, going back to Aristotle, is the idea of human fulfillment. One of the things I talk, or the way I express to my students, is that we're not talking about happiness in the happenstance, sort of way, where if things are my way, I'm happy, and if they're not my way, I'm unhappy. But rather, I think John Stuart Mill put it this way: there's this steady flame of fulfillment despite the ups and downs of life, right? So your pursuit of happiness is the pursuit of fulfillment, not of always feeling good all the time and always having things your way.
But do people think that far into it?
But that's what they think, and that's what all the self-help books say.
Yeah, right, the self-help.
Think of people that are public figures and celebrities that you think, oh, they should be so happy. They have so much money and they have fame, but really that
like a lot of them are very miserable.
Yeah. I'm talking about ones
which
that
we covered on Counterparts and Test Reco, yeah.
Kurt Cobain was a great example.
Yeah. Rest in peace.
Yeah. Now, at this point, we do have another pre-chorus and chorus. And of course, they are the same as the previous pre-chorus and chorus, because Neil looked to drive home that sentiment. So I'm not going to reread them because we've already read them, and we're 38 minutes into this video. So at that point, I'm going to actually say that after that repeat of the pre-chorus and chorus, we get an interlude, of course. Interlude is a re-intro also. Dropping in on that, what did we say it was? F sharp 11 chord. And then, of course, Lifeson on the studio has the solo with many sustained notes on many tracks, because that was his shtick at the time. But live, he basically leaned into some unison bends, rocking the Les Paul and doing some Jimmy Page style unison bends. Not that Jimmy Page is the only guy who did it, but I'm just saying he's a Jimmy Page fan, and he was using guitar that clearly made him think of Jimmy Page. Yeah. Anyone else?
Someone want to talk about the Gilmore connection at this point too? The inspiration that he took from David Gilmour writing on acoustic for the album. I thought those were throwing out there. I don't know if anybody had anything specific on that. That's not my forte, but I read it. So I
just going back to the beginning of this thing. I mean, the acoustics all throughout. Right. But at the beginning, it's definitely got it doesn't have David Gilmour, but it's Pete Townsend, Pinball Wizard, that strumming pattern. But it's like, I love that the acoustic is just throughout the whole thing. It's just another layer, an extra texture, which I think his playing for the last 20 years, probably longer, has been really textural and about building, like it's got a lot of layers to it. But that's a solo where you go, "Ooh, he's going to tear into something there," and then he doesn't. He does something totally different, which is like and I listened to it on the way home too, and I was just like, "That's pretty neat." Like he just did something totally left of center, and I think that's really cool, and I think that's probably a David Gilmour thing too. It's just like sometimes less is more. Yeah.
Well, especially
the idea
far in
that
your career.
it's like, this is such a powerful, hard-hitting song, right? So he should shred. He should play as fast as he can. And Alex just no,
Yeah.
And it's perfect for the song. Absolutely perfect. Yeah. Tyler, you're 100% right on. 110% right on target.
Yeah, I always thought of that too. And with the acoustic aspects. Whenever I've heard anything from Test for Echo forward, or I should say Victor forward, the way he was doing the guitars, especially bringing in acoustic, it's just Pete Townsend. If anyone can bring in another name, I'm like Pete Townsend. Oh, life's Pete Townsend. Deal with it. Pinball Wizard. Tyler said it. That's what I've been thinking for 20 years, 30 years. Sorry.
Yeah.
Ish. So awesome. Well, wait a second. There's a pre-chorus after the solo, but it's different. So what is that pre-chorus? It's a far cry from the world we thought we'd inherit. You can almost see the circle growing. You can almost feel the planets glowing. So one of those messages of power that they like to throw in there towards the end of the lyrics or heading towards. Thoughts on that?
Second favorite lyric of the song right there, because going back to Kira's original point in the beginning of this episode, the circle is growing. It's growth, expansion. You can almost feel the planets glowing. I'm sorry, but I tie that all the way back into electrical changes are charging up the young.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The one thing I wonder, and I have no idea, I mean, Neil just could have been in his mind, especially being in Canada, and knowing so much more about like indigenous people and things like that. But circles are very, very common.
Yes.
I'm going to be doing a conference in the Indiana Dunes this coming June, where we're dealing with a lot of First Nation peoples. And one of the things we're going to do a lot of academic stuff, but a lot of experiential stuff. And one of the things we're going to be doing is our circles.
Yep. The medicine wheel.
Yeah, exactly. And so the circle grows, which speaks of more acceptance, more bringing people in, and then the idea of, glowing, right, is kind of symbolic of more light. So I mean, I have no idea, because I don't know what Neil was thinking when he wrote that and what experiences and knowledge he brought into that lyric, but I think it does speak to the possibility of wider acceptance and indigenous knowledge, that is so dreadfully lacking. But back in 2007, I mean, Neil's lyrics are always timeless. They speak to every generation in new ways, and I think this is one of those that does that. Yeah.
You stop and think about the fact that a circle also does have a certain representation of equality, much like if people are involved with what's called a round table. Even if there's a host, that host isn't more important than the person that who's now going to speak, or that other panelist. Everyone's basically at the same level and saying something. That's the whole point of the
round table of Camelot, right?
Yes,
exactly.
Not that, and then obviously Camelot's a perfect example where that can really go awry. So,
yeah, true.
And he revisits these themes, and how we could go through every album and find a song that's going to touch on this somehow. But we mentioned as far as in the chorus, one day I feel I'm ahead of the wheel, and next it's rolling over me. Between the wheels, we've been here before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We're the rabbit.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
We still have another chorus to go in this song.
What?
Yeah. And it begins the same, One day I feel I'm on top of the world, next it's falling in on me. I can get back on, I can get back on. One day I'm ahead of the wheel, and next it's rolling over me. I can get back on, I can get back on. And then we have another stanza for that chorus. One day I fly through a crack in the sky, and the next it's falling in on me. I can get back on, I can get back on. There's a little bit of the crack in the sky reference is not uncommon, he says, with an intentional double negative in the rock world.
Yeah.
Whether you're talking about guitar players like David Torn or bands like Mastodon, Crack in the Sky is a common reference. And I don't mean it in a trite
Black
way.
Sabbath, Hole in the Sky.
Right.
Yeah.
Sabotage is one of my favorite Sabbath albums.
Yes, absolutely. Phenomenal. This is one of those ones where, again, I really think he was just going for some real visual stuff. Like stuff that makes you think, not necessarily. I think he always wrote with themes in mind, but I think this one was more just like, I'm going to throw some stuff out there and then just see how it looks afterwards. And since Getty said it all kind of just fit perfectly with what him and Alex were coming up with, it's a interesting. I just think it was kind of a word experiment that ended up having some themes to it, and then some of these themes have yet, like some of them we're not quite sure what he's going for. Maybe it's because some of these stanzas, their time has yet to come, right? So they don't make sense yet, but they will in time. But yeah, flying through the crack in the sky, it's like breaking the glass ceiling, of different types and whatever. I think that's the image that comes to mind for me. It was like, different like genders and getting to be the first of this, or just new things happening. Things that weren't originally possible become possible, and so sometimes, like for me, career-wise, I feel like I need to break the glass ceiling. I haven't done it yet, but what happens if I do? It's going to feel like, I don't know. I get that might lead to its own set of frustrations, once you.
No, that's great, because I think the whole song is about, we thought we would have this world and we don't get it. And, the sky's the limit, but it's a limit. But then there's a crack in the sky. Just might be able to get beyond that. Just might be able to do that and make things better. But then, and sometimes it comes crashing down. So it's just this constant tension and conflict and interplay with possibility, promise, hope, and life just,
almost like a cycle where we're ascending through ranks, and then
but you
it brings us back.
It.
We don't have to.
You
we don't even
stop.
have to go into the history. We can hold off on the history until Armor and Sword. But just something to consider is, in the start of the song, we were talking about birth, or we're talking about the initial start of it all. And now, at the end of the song, here we are at the crack in the sky, going beyond the seventh plane, for example, if it were a game board on the Game of Life, into the eighth, which is the cosmic consciousness, and beyond that, and then the cycle starts anew. Maybe.
I'll just say this. I won't go too far, Paul. I won't go too far. But the idea of dharma, do the right thing and it leads to harmony, right? Cosmic harmony. Act contrary to dharma and, things fall to shit, But the hopeful thing in this song is that you can keep getting back on.
Yes.
And keep getting, the wheel can even roll over you. Doesn't matter. You can get back on.
Yep.
Jeez, I love Rush.
I was going to say that really sums it up well.
Well, I feel like visuals would sum things up even better.
If I had it ready, I would agree 100%.
I mean, needless to say, Rush, aside from monster lyrics that are loaded and deep, and then these instrumental passages that we all know, obviously there's the intro, Hugh Simon's making it a point to include some really quality artwork.
Yeah, wish I had it up. So, and I will not be able to minimize while we're recording, so we are going to have to skip the visual this week due to my lack of preparation. But it is readily available on CygnusX1.net, where the artwork from each song on this album every song has its own piece of art, and if you've seen the music video for Far Cry, you've seen it. And if you own the album or the digipack, which we conveniently have here, which now that I think about it, I should actually be able to go all old school.
There we go.
And simply hold it up. How's that? So
there we go.
There's Far Cry's artwork. Next week we will go all tech and share the image. But we've got the pier, we've got the stroller, we've got the lightning coming down, and electrical changes are charging out the young. We've got the birds soaring over here, and actually,
in the video, the little baby hand comes up.
The Kraken skies.
And at least one Redditor pointed out they thought that the pier might have been inspired by the pier at Lake Perry near the studio. I don't know the accuracy of that. I simply found that fact interesting. So, worth throwing out there. And video by Christopher Mills, which shows a lot of that imagery and other old imagery as well from throughout their career. So, worth checking out as well.
Nice. Well, that seems like that brings us to the end of Far Cry. I mean, unless we had any other things we wanted to reference. I mean, certainly they did play this live on the tour. And because, I mean, I was already talking about
every tour.
Yeah.
Every tour. They kind of like this one.
Yeah.
As well they should.
Yes.
Well, they should, because this was a hell of a statement. I mean, Vapor Trails to me is like, it's Rush's back, but it was more Neil's back.
Yeah.
This album and this song in particular says that Alex is back, but Rush as a whole is back. We're back to we're back to full strength and starting to tie all these threads that they've done throughout their careers. This is the album where they're kind of bringing all the elements together. And so that's the take I got from that. So.
It was kind of a rebirth, and it really set the stage. Like so many Rush albums are, Chris of Steel made 2112 possible. Permanent Waves made Moving Pictures possible. Yeah. Even though they're very different albums, Snakes and Arrows may have very well made Clockwork Angels possible.
Yep.
Nice.
What a great song. Yeah.
Well, we had a lot to say about this because it's a deep song. It's a monster piece of music. So anyway, with that, I suppose we should probably bring this to a close. Unless anyone really has anything pressing to say, please say no. Good. Now, in that respect, again, we still have sponsors that might be located at the bottom of the page. We still have things like Ko-fi. Feel free to subscribe and share this thing. Basically that. Usually YouTube stuff. Ring the bell.
Check out our merch store.
That's right. Rush Fans merch store. How foolish of me to not mention that. So there we go. That's found below. So again, thank you for joining us as we begin Snakes and Arrows from 2007. At least I remember the year this time. I've had an hour to think about it. So again, Far Cry, episode 251. You have reached the end of it. We have reached the end of it. And then on to Armor and Sword and more Camelot next week. So thank you. And we'll see you next time on Rush Roundtable.